Hello, welcome to Mod Midwives, a Metro Midwifery podcast. I'm Gina Gerboth.
And I'm Nedra Hale, and we are home birth midwives serving the Denver metro area.
Welcome to the new week. How have you been doing? You've had craziness this week.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, I'm a little sunburned, and that is because we completely emptied my garage yesterday and organized our sheds because we're going to be turning the garage into an apartment for my dad. So
Yeah.
we're all.
As somebody who helped you load your garage, I can tell you that must have been a huge job because it was packed.
Most of it was, I would say like 2/3 of it was already unpacked and gone. So it easily fit into one of the sheds. And honestly, one of my children's stuff, you know who I'm talking about,
I don't.
is a full third of what is out there because said person is a pack rat and has like 7 boxes of random stuff that
I can't decide if I think it's the first or the third.
it's the first.
Oh, okay.
So
The third also seems like they could be a pack rat.
Yes, yeah, we do fight that a little bit. But I said to this child, please come out, like I put all the boxes in a pile in the yard. I'm like, please come out and consolidate these boxes so that we can not have them take up so much space. And I ended up, of course, at the end of the day, putting them in the shed as is because that's, we were done. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're going in.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, we've been doing a little of that too. My middle one is leaving for boot camp tomorrow, actually. And I don't know why he decided to do this, but he decided to move out of his room. We knew he was going to move out of, we have a guest room. We knew he would move out of his room and just stay in the guest room when he comes back. But for some reason, he decided to do this 2 weeks ago, which led to a giant disaster, trying to consolidate all his stuff because he'll need his stuff somewhere else before he'll need it at home again.
Right.
So kind of getting it movable and then moving and then his old room is becoming my husband's office, and it's just been so much.
Did you have to get a storage unit for him or?
Oh gosh, no. It all fits in half of a closet upstairs.
Oh.
He's not attached to very many things. It's just a matter of and we have to make a big trip to the thrift store, and we need to get one of those bins, the cloth bins that you put in your driveway and then they come and pick them up for trash. Mm-hmm. Dumpster bin thing, dumpster bag. Bagster, that's
ordering one of those myself, so
yeah. I think we could possibly need to, but it's just because his bed is trashed. We've got to get rid of some furniture, and big trash day isn't until September. So anyway, yeah, we've been doing the same kind of thing, and it's exhausting. It is exhausting. Mm-hmm. And I'm really starting to, I know I sounded like super cold-hearted last time I talked about him leaving home. I'm starting to feel sad about it. And he's my buddy. He's the one that'll sit around and watch movies that I want to watch and stuff like that. And, he's the only one that's flexible. The other two are they only watch meaningful things. And I just need someone to watch Grey's Anatomy with.
Yeah. Oh, so, that's gonna be sad.
Yeah. So
and how long is it gonna be gone? It's how many weeks?
Oh, I mean forever.
So he doesn't come back after boot camp. He goes somewhere else.
Yeah. Boot camp.
Not being a military mom.
Boot camp is 10 weeks, but there's a 2-week quarantine. So boot camp will be 12 weeks. And then he has his next thing. He goes to do prerequisites for his MOS, which is his job. I can't remember what it stands for though. Something of service. His job. He has to do a prerequisite training in Virginia for that, and then he has to go to Texas for his training for his job. That's months and months and months, 6 months right there. And then he gets a job, and then he has to go live somewhere else. So
somewhere.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, he'll come back for a weekend maybe, or we thought there would be 2 weeks between boot camp and his first training, but there's not. So it's just, yeah.
Wow,
It's
that's
like
big.
serious. It is big. The other child has moved out before and is back. So, we certainly have had some moving out of kids, but didn't stick. This one's likely to stick.
Wow.
So, yeah. Yeah. So, lots of big changes and lots of work. Just so much work this week. And plus, it was just a crazy week. I was just slammed with appointments somehow. It was very
You had a
like
really, those days looked really long.
really long days. And so, yeah. So here we are Sunday doing Mod Midwives because it didn't get done on Friday, which is when we like to do it. Coincidentally, also this week is World Breastfeeding Week. Oh, good. You can hear all the neighborhood dogs barking now. Can you hear? Horrible.
Only when you pointed it out, I could kind of hear a noise.
They're going crazy. It's not the mailman because it's Sunday, so I don't know what it is. But so UNICEF and the World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action team up to do World Breastfeeding Week every year, and it's meant to be an advocacy event, a public awareness event. And back in the day when I was involved in the Leche League, we would often do like a walk. Some organizations got even bigger. In Colorado, there was something called the Breastival in the first week of August. Lots of events, but obviously there are no events this year. So
I saw they were doing, what is that one? They were doing like a virtual, I can't remember the name of
it's
it.
not the Breastival.
No.
Hmm.
No, 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 no. Maybe it is. Maybe it is, and I just thought it was something else. But anyway, it's virtual, I think.
A virtual event. And by the way, I'm over virtual events. I will this is as much virtual. This and teaching is all I can handle. I just can't
Well,
anymore.
they just announced for our big social club that we're in, they just announced no in-person events until at least January 31st. So I
Oh,
think we're actually going to hit the virtual events pretty hard because we're feeling a little bummed out about that. So
it's more of your social outlet, and you don't get as much in person. I think I get my social needs met differently
yeah,
than you do.
yeah,
There's more people. I see more people in the office. I just feel like
yeah.
I do not need virtual connections to get my social needs met. In fact, it's a drain on my social needs.
It's hard. It's a whole different type of energy suck to do a virtual thing. And it took me a really long time to get like I would get headaches. I mean, I get headaches easily anyway, but I think the way that I hold my body gives me headaches when I'm doing virtual meetings and stuff. So it's not ideal, but I think we're
Mm-hmm.
going to have to do it because it's going to be like a year.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we actually see people again, it'll have been a
Mm-hmm.
year almost.
Yeah,
So
for that group
that
of
group, yeah,
people. Mm-hmm.
right,
Yeah, I know. It's really interesting. Well, so what we're going to do for World Breastfeeding Week is so one of our most popular themes on social media is the myth and fact post. So we do myths every Thursday for Throwback Thursday. Shout out to Kristen who came up with that idea. And they are pretty consistently some of our most popular and shared posts. So this week we are going to do myths, like top breastfeeding myths in order to kind of honor World Breastfeeding Week. So you might have heard us talk about some of these already, but we're
yeah.
going to just tackle them. So I think that the first myth to start off with is kind of tackling all the myths around colostrum. Colostrum is the first milk that is produced. It's available in small quantities. And there are so many myths prevalent across all cultures that colostrum isn't adequate, that it's not adequate intake for the newborn. So what do you tell people about that?
Well, I tell people that the baby's stomach is really tiny and that the colostrum is the perfect amount for what their tiny stomach needs. And that it's such a small amount, they might not see it, and that's okay. Like, you just kind of go on faith that this is happening.
Hmm.
The baby is getting it, and it is exactly what they need. It's packed with all these nutrients and antibodies, and it helps them clear the meconium and seed their gut flora and all of this stuff, and it's
Yeah,
exactly what they need. They don't need anything else. And yes, they will get hungry as the next 2 or 3 days goes by before the milk comes in, and that's what it's supposed to do. They're supposed to get hungry and start eating and nurse, 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 and then the milk comes in because they helped it happen. That's what I
right,
say. You
right.
think?
Good, good, good. Yeah, I talk about all of that stuff. I talk about that it actually, you said it helps clear the meconium, but it actually has a laxative effect. So it actually, really helps clear the meconium. By all accounts, breast milk must have a laxative effect based on
Oh,
the
yeah,
amount of pooping that we have with
there's
breastfed
a lot of
babies. But
poop.
yes, and that it is also just super concentrated with immunity and immune factors. And so it really is like not just seeding the gut, but also just like this injection of immune and protective factors going right into the baby. Yeah, I like that you talk about breastfeeding and you talk about birth this way too, that there's this element of mystery or that you have to have a certain amount of faith. And I think it's funny because you're not like religious in a traditional sense,
Right.
but it's true. And so like as a Catholic, like the mystery and the faith are all, those are all words that we use all the time. And I like that you use them for birth and breastfeeding and lactation, because there is a certain amount of just like, you have to trust this process a little
Have to
bit.
know, you just have to know that
Yeah,
it's okay.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, good. Okay, so that's our first one. Colostrum is not only enough, it's the perfect way to start your baby's life. What about, we've touched on this one too, but I want to hit it early. The myth, we're going to call it a myth because it's so prevalent in the natural birth world, that breastfeeding shouldn't hurt at all.
Mm, right.
That it's, it should be painless. And I think anytime we have an unrealistic expectation, we're likely to have a problem. Just like we've talked about with like the promises of a pain-free birth or anything like that.
Right.
It's probably better to have a little bit of a uh, be prepared, maybe
Right.
have your mind towards the possibility that you're going to have a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of challenges.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it is actually kind of weird to think that you would not have some kind of soreness because you all of a sudden have this baby that is nursing and probably kind of fumbling at it for the first few days.
Both of you're both learning how to do
Yeah,
it.
and
Yeah.
this child might be nursing like 12 or 14 times a day for an hour, like,
A
of,
lot of time.
of course they're going to be sore.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out what is normal soreness and what is not normal soreness, I think is the key. And just
Hmm.
like, it's not realistic to think there would be none, I think.
Hmm. And I think that this myth is generated from the idea that, so people would start off nursing, have a bunch of pain, cracked and bleeding nipples, and then just people would just tell them that's just the way it is, you have to toughen up. And so this is a pendulum swing in the wrong direction. I mean, it's also not normal for you to have cracked and bleeding nipples and so much pain that you can barely stand it. However, it's not realistic to expect it not to hurt at all. And I'm here to tell you, I did tandem nurse two of my children, which means that I nursed my older child and my baby at the same time. I would like to say my toddler and my baby, but he was in fact not a toddler. And even though he was nursing all through the pregnancy and at the beginning of lactation, I still had sore nipples because I think part of it is due to hormonal shifts.
Mm,
So I think it's not just a matter of use. And certainly my third child latched on so easily. We never had any problems with, you know, breastfeeding at all. I mean, really at all with him. The other two, I had lots of problems, but it still was tender because you've got all those shifts happening in your body. And
That makes sense.
yeah, so no, it shouldn't be excruciatingly painful. It might be a little bit uncomfortable. And if it's more than a little bit uncomfortable, you should get some help because, you know, both of those things are true.
Yes.
My gauge that I tell people is if it's kind of like you latch on and you're like, and then, you know, baby starts nursing and then you can kind of sink back into it, that's probably in the normal range.
Yep.
But if it hurts throughout the feeding, if words like excruciating are being used, that's probably not normal.
Toe curling.
Toe curling
is what I think of, having
yes
experienced some incredible nipple pain in my time.
yes Tinder, yes. Excruciatingly toe curlingly painful, no. Good. All right, we're going to tackle now, we're going to go on to what I hear people of older generation say frequently, which is that my milk wasn't rich enough. So have you heard that?
Oh yeah. And also the colostrum thing is in that same category. It's like, yeah, it's from the older generation of, you know, there's a lot of things in that category. My milk isn't rich enough. Yeah. So what do you say to that? What is your answer?
Well, the general composition of human milk is basically the same regardless of the lactating person's diet. So sometimes people will preface this conversation that what can I eat to make my milk richer? And while you can change small things in your milk, overall your macros are going to be the same no matter what you're eating, because your body knows how to take what is in your body and turn it into you know, nutritious food for your baby.
Right.
So that's part of what I kind of talk about. And then I usually kind of go back historically and say, look, some of this advice started in the post-World War II era. Formula was coming out. It was all about being able to quantify and control. And there was this idea that something that was made in a laboratory was superior because it was predictable. And that's just not how milk works. We have variations in our milk composition throughout not only the year, but throughout the day. And so you don't even have the same richness from feeding to feeding, let alone from, you know, from what a 1 day old needs to a 1 month old to a 1 year old, like all of that changes. So this goes back to the faith a little bit, that you can't, you have to just believe that there's a reason that milk composition isn't stable from meal to meal. And I think that's a beauty of it too. I think that the thought of eating the same meal every day, 8 to 10 times a day for a year, 8 to 10 meaning if you were formula feeding, not if you're breastfeeding. You should probably feed more than that if you're breastfeeding. But you know, 8 bottles a day for a year that are the same thing, that's not very exciting.
No.
So, so, you know, the variation is, there's a lot involved with the variation. For example, we know that breastfed toddlers, like, or breastfed older infants that are being introduced to foods more readily accept solid foods because they're interested and familiar with having different flavors and tastes and stuff like that. So yeah, so this, I usually go historical for this. And this is something I remember my husband's grandmother saying, like, oh, I couldn't breastfeed because my milk wasn't rich enough. There's actually no test for that. Like, there is no way that anybody could have tested your milk and had valid information from that. There's tests, but they're not valid. So it's hard. It depends on who's saying it and how much, you know, how much are you going to debunk? How much are you going to inform versus how much do you just not go there? Because what is the use of telling the 70-year-old woman that she was lied to?
Oh, right.
Super tricky.
What about the hind milk and the fore milk thing? How does that come into this?
Yeah, so hind milk and fore milk is a little bit of a it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's not like there's two types of milk, and that's how it gets sort of portrayed on the discussion boards and stuff like that. But fore milk, for lack of a better word, has less fat, more lactose, more protein, more water. And then as the feeding progresses, it transitions into hind milk, which has more fat and is more filling. But it's not a like fore milk's turned on and then it turns off and then hind milk starts coming out. It's like a continuum. It kind of gradually shifts over the feed. So yeah, so if somebody's pumping, that's actually that's a great thing to bring up, because if somebody's pumping, they're usually pumping more fore milk than hind milk, and it will not have as much fat. And so when you set it out and then you watch the fat separate, which people do, like
tiny
yes,
on the top, yeah,
you could very well have milk that looks like it doesn't have a lot of fat. So what the baby takes is not the same thing as what the pump extracts. And also, one of my favorite quotations for life is "Comparison is the thief of joy." Is that it's attributed to Ben Franklin. I don't know if that's really true or not.
No idea.
But anybody who takes their express milk and sets it next to somebody else's express milk is just bound to decide that there's something wrong with theirs. So don't do it. Don't look at it. So yeah, so that is probably part of the pumping fore milk is probably part of the just constellation of things that makes people think that their milk might not be quote unquote rich enough. Also, the word rich annoys me to describe fatty or something. Yeah. I don't know why, but I think it's kind of colloquial, old timey sort of language. Yeah. So then that kind of leads to another myth, which is that I didn't make enough milk, so maybe not rich enough milk, so I had to wean my baby. Yeah. And this is tough. Back to the faith, back to the idea that you can't necessarily quantify what your baby's taking in.
Right.
So how do you know? I know you're somebody who has struggled with a true low milk supply. How did you differentiate for you the difference between this is a real problem versus I think this is a problem?
I mean, I think it was different with every baby, honestly. So
maybe let's just talk about your fourth, just because.
Yeah, what it comes down to in the end is the baby growing and thriving, so it, because even with my child, I had one child that I had no milk supply problems with. And even with him, it's not like I was seeing the milk, like I wasn't pumping or anything. It was all, he was growing and there were no issues. So, but with my fourth one, he was not growing. He was very small and he continued to get smaller, and it was, I mean, he just wasn't getting enough. But it took a long time to just like say, this is really a problem. And it was fine. And we ended up having the best breastfeeding relationship of all my kids, even though he was supplemented. So it was fine in the end, like, in an emotional sense, but it, you have to see how your baby's doing, I guess, is the answer. Is this baby growing and thriving or not?
And there's a lot of associated myths with this too. For example, that output is more important than weight gain. That's not true. Weight gain is the bottom line. Are they gaining an appropriate amount of weight? Some babies will stool and void frequently and not be gaining adequate weight. So you can't always tell by diaper output. Diaper output's your first clue.
Right.
What are you expecting to see? But it's not enough information. So, and even something that I occasionally do is a pre and post feed weight, where we check on the sensitive scale, how much milk the baby transferred during a feeding. That's not a great way either, because every feeding in the day is different. That's just a snapshot of that one feeding, which is often not a great feeding in the office. They're usually distracted, and maybe they had to nurse in order to get in the car seat, and so it wasn't that long ago since they've nursed. And just lots of things. So really we have to look at weight trending over time to know how the baby's doing. But the truth of the matter is that perceived low milk supply is the number one cause for weaning, and it's 95% of the time it's not true.
Right. And there's so many things to work on. And you know, if you have an actual endocrine issue like I do that really makes it so I'm not making enough milk, those things can be really frustrating. But I
Mm-hmm.
still did all the things, and for I would say for most people those things are going to work because
Mm-hmm.
most of the people are not going to have the endocrine issues, you know,
Mm-hmm. Right.
but there it's just like you can tinker with it a little bit and get it to work most of the time.
Right. And I mean, actually, most of the time it's behavioral. Usually, when people are saying my baby's not getting enough, it's possible that they're not getting enough, but it's something they're doing. For example, they're timing feedings, scheduling feedings, trying to get them to sleep through the night, giving them a pacifier, many, many, many
Or
parent
being
behaviors.
frustrated with normal baby things like the
Yes, not
frequent,
understanding.
like the, you know, I don't know, that's probably it, like the fact that babies need to nurse a lot.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's part of our work and the work of peer-to-peer groups that we have. We have a group on Monday mornings. I'll try to plug it at the end, but we welcome anybody since it's virtual. Anybody can come now. But part of the peer-to-peer model is normalizing normal breastfeeding behavior. And so that's a big thing is if you just understand that it's normal for babies to want to stay at the breast a lot of time. Now, all of that being said, sometimes we over normalize and there can be babies that are starving. And so they're literally on the breast frustrated all the time. And that's not normal. So there is definitely a need to kind of suss out where are we talking about normal behavior and where are we talking about a baby who's hungry. That's why you need a lactation professional from time to time.
Right,
But the
exactly.
fact that most people wean because they don't think they're making enough milk, and either they're making plenty of milk and they just don't know the markers of normal growth, or they're doing things to undermine their own breastfeeding success. That's why this is such a big
Right,
problem, this problem
right.
of perceived milk supply insufficiency. All right. It kind of goes into the next one, which we've posted about in a Throwback Thursday, that you need to let the breast refill before you feed again. Is that something you'd ever heard?
Yes, but it's just so funny. I just
It is funny. That's
yes.
not really how they work. There's two analogies that I really like to talk about milk supply. First of all, I don't like the term demand feeding or feeding on demand. I think that that's negative and it sets up like an adversarial expectation for it perpetuates that myth that babies are manipulating you. So I don't like that.
Oh,
I much prefer the term cue feeding. We're watching the baby's hunger cues and then responding appropriately to that.
oh, that's nice. I like that.
Hmm. But I do use the term demand in that it's not supply and demand. Breastfeeding is not supply and demand, it's demand and supply. The more the baby nurses, the more milk you'll make. When the baby nurses on breasts that are quote unquote emptier, then it sends a signal to your brain that you need to make more milk. Like, oh, this baby needs more. Let's up this production for tomorrow. This happens a lot in the evenings. Babies have that thing called you've heard it called the witching hour, or, the cranky time of day that babies are just fussy and they just want to nurse all evening long before they go to bed. That's when your supply is naturally at the lowest. So it's true that they're not getting those really big feeds usually at that time of day. But when they do that cluster feeding, it's signaling your body to up your production for the next day. Because the thing about nursing a growing baby is that they get bigger every day and they need a little more milk over
Right,
time.
right.
When your breasts are full, so if you were to wait until your breasts felt full before you nursed your baby, there's a hormone called the feedback inhibitor of lactation. So full breasts release FIL, and that tells your brain to make less milk. You don't really need all this milk. So actually letting your breasts refill and get full decreases your milk supply.
Mm.
So it's very backwards from the
Interesting.
reality. But also, there's no such thing as an empty breast. So I always like to throw that in there too, that if, let's say people get really stressed out about like they want to pump and they don't know when to pump because they don't want the baby to starve if they pump at the wrong time.
Right.
And the truth is you can pump, get as much milk out as you can. The baby can go to the breast. They're still going to get milk because there's this kind of like on-site production of milk that happens. So there's
Yeah.
no such thing as an empty breast. But
Yay.
a full breast is bad. It sends the signal that you don't need to make so much milk. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's, I mean, I know that it's about milk, like in this moment, but I also just like to remember that there's other stuff happening when you're breastfeeding. So even if it is in that one of those times when we're at a lower amount of milk in the breast, there's all of this psychological benefit and physiological benefit and all this stuff happening anyway. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And again, going back to surrender, the more that you can just surrender to the process, the more happy you'll be with it. So
Yeah.
what happens, like, let's say if you're separated for work that day and then you happen to come back at 5 o'clock, which happens to be the witching hour, if you can actually just resign yourself to the fact that I'm going to spend my evenings reconnecting with the baby, it's going to boost my supply. It's going to help us have some, bonding time together.
Yeah.
It's great. I
Sounds
think it's a great thing to do. I wish I could do that now.
I know. I want a baby to sit with
To
from
slow
5
you down.
p.m. Thank you very much.
Because you talk about that. What did your mom accuse you of?
Yeah, she accused me of having babies so that I could sit down. And I'm like, I don't know that that's how it works, but it's kind of true though that you have your job is to now sit with this baby, or at least a big part of your job. I realize there's a lot more to your job than holding this baby, but it is like a priority job to sit and hold
Mm-hmm.
this baby, and that I do miss that. That would be so great right now. I
Mm-hmm.
would welcome it.
Plus prolactin.
Yes.
I'm a prolactin junkie, as you know. So it
Yeah.
would be it's a great way to unwind at the end of the day. And then our final myth also we've done for Throwback Thursday is that when it's hot, this time of year in particular, you're sweating, you're outside, lots of evaporative stuff
Yeah.
happening,
Yeah.
that you should supplement your exclusively breastfed baby with water. And that is a very dangerous myth that we just want to X out right here. No, no, no. Water supplementation of an exclusively breastfed baby throws off all of the electrolyte balance that happens with milk, which is perfectly meant to meet a baby's thirst and hunger needs. And actually at our little family party last night, I just blew my brother-in-law's mind when I was like, oh, well, they nurse different if they're thirsty than they do if they're hungry. He's like, what? Like he had no idea. His new little granddaughter was over and she's a happy breastfed baby. And it just blew his mind to think that, oh, they'll nurse in one way if they really just want more fluid, and they'll nurse in another way if they're hungry. They nurse in yet another way if they're sleepy, just want to go to sleep or get comfort, at the breast. And so, the beauty of this is that they're in control. They're getting what they need from you, which is awesome.
That's so great.
Yeah. So don't give your exclusively breastfed baby water. For most babies, it's appropriate to introduce water when they start eating some solid foods. So a little bit of water in a sippy cup or even just an open cup when they start eating foods is fine. But up until then, just breast milk. Yeah. Breast milk only.
That was a tough one when I lived in Phoenix because it's so hot and people really wanted to give their babies water. So, I mean, it was something we talked about all the time. Like, don't do it. Don't give your babies water.
Yeah. Sorry, I think you just heard my calendar reminder.
I didn't hear it, but maybe
they you didn't? That's weird. I could hear it, but yeah. And just a quick little disclaimer here. World Breastfeeding Week is obviously not gender inclusive language. We are aware that there's challenges in use of the term breast and breastfeeding for some folks, and we are working on it. Sometimes it's hard when we're kind of just going on and talking about the importance of providing milk to your baby. We have a language for that, and we're still working on our language. But just a nod that we did, you know, we know World Breastfeeding Week is in itself gendered language, and that we know that we, especially when we talk about lactation topics, that we have a default to gendered language. So we are working on it. I realized at the end of the podcast, oh, we were really bad about it this time.
Yeah, we usually do
try
better.
A little. We try a little, or yeah, exactly. We try to be a little more inclusive. Anyway, yeah, so if anybody's interested, we welcome people to participate in breastfeeding virtual cafe. Monday mornings at 10 a.m. It's over Zoom. If you're interested, send me an email at Gina@metromidwifery.com. You could send one to Gina@midwifegina.com too. And I'll send you a calendar invitation, because the best way to do it is to get on the calendar invitation, so that if I have to cancel for a birth, you'll get that notification in your calendar and people won't show up. It's really fine to drop in, but if nobody's there by 10:15, I leave. So drop in is fine as long as somebody's holding it open at 10:15. By 10:15, I'm like, well, I guess I'll get my paperwork done instead. Answer my emails. So, and then you can also find more of our Throwback Thursday tips and tricks and all of that on our social media, especially Instagram @MetroMidwifery. It all forwards over to Facebook too, though. And then actually, you put quite a lot of it on Twitter, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll see some of those that we do, but you know, it's just one of those things. There's so many myths. There's so much misinformation. We live in a formula normative culture. It is changing, but it's changing slowly. The more of the good information we can spread, the more that we help change to a breastfeeding normative culture.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good week. Wish us luck as we get through our crazy week.
Yes, this is going to be an interesting month, I think.
Yes. Luckily, the baby boom has slowed down. So
yeah. Babies, I think, are going to be, you know, just like the schedule is going to be more manageable.
For about 4 months. We have about 4 months of manageability until the coronials start being born.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Okay, everybody. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.